In the pre-dawn darkness of April 12, 1980, Master Sergeant Doe led a band of his Crown soldiers to Monrovia's executive mansion. Bullets tore into the home of President William Talbot, the Americo-Liberian leader. In minutes, Talbot was dead. Those men killed another 26 of Talbot's guards and aides in the fighting. The country was thrown into chaos. Within days, the new regime publicly executed 13 members of Talbot's cabinet, accused of treason and corruption, by firing squad on a Monrovia beach. Diplomats or lawyers meant nothing in that mob of fear. Hundreds of government officials fled the country or were thrown into prison. Before we go any further, take 2 seconds and hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy deep African history, untold political stories, and powerful documentaries like this one, subscribing helps the channel grow and lets you know the moment the next video drops. Subscribe now, and let's continue. Today, we are diving deep into the rise and catastrophic fall of Liberia's 21st president. We will cover his humble beginnings, the violent overthrow of a century-old elite, his corrupt and authoritarian rule, and the savage execution that ended it all. This is a story of ambition, tribal conflict, Cold War politics, and ultimate, terrible revenge. On April 12, 1980, the world woke up to news from the small West African nation of Liberia. For 133 years, this country, founded by freed American slaves, had been ruled by a tiny elite known as the Americo-Liberians. But that night, that all changed. A group of 17 indigenous soldiers, armed and angry, crept towards the executive mansion in the capital, Monrovia. Leading them was a 28-year-old master sergeant with a 4th-grade education named Samuel Doe. To understand how Samuel Doe happened to Liberia, you have to understand the deep-seated resentment that had been brewing for generations. The Americo-Liberians, though only about 5% of the population, had hoarded power and wealth since independence in 1847, treating the indigenous majority much as they themselves had been treated in the American South. Samuel Doe was born into that majority. Samuel Canyon Doe was born on May 6, 1951, in the small inland village of Tuzon in Grand Gede County. He was a member of the Kran ethnic group, a minority tribe often looked down upon by the coastal elite. His path to power wasn't through politics or law school, it was through the military. He enlisted in the armed forces of Liberia in 1969, at just 18 years old, hoping to get an education. He rose slowly. By 1979, he had made it to the rank of Master Sergeant and administrator for the 3rd Battalion in Monrovia. He was a nobody in the grand scheme of things, but the country was a tinderbox. In April 1979, the rice riots had erupted when the government proposed raising the price of the staple food. Protesters were shot. The Talbot regime was weak, corrupt, and wobbling. On the night of April 11, 1980, Doe and his squad of Crown soldiers struck. They stormed the executive mansion. In the ensuing chaos, President William R. Talbot Jr. was cornered. Accounts vary wildly about his death. Official reports say he was shot while trying to escape. But a darker story persists, one told by Talbot's own wife, Victoria. In her autobiography, she describes witnessing a mass and seeing the light of sound in nature and full love. This has fueled decades of speculation that the CIA had a hand in the coup. Years later, Doe's own former Justice Minister, Chea Chipu, testified before Liberia's Truth and Reconciliation Commission that a white CIA agent was the one who pulled the trigger and that the Americans provided the map of the mansion, whether that is true or not. And another Doe minister, Boy Mafambula, strongly denied it. What happened next is undisputed. Samuel Doe, a master sergeant, just days before, was now the head of state, promoting himself to the rank of general. The world was watching. At first, there was hope. Here was a man of the people, finally breaking the Americo-Liberian stranglehold. But that hope turned to horror within days. Doe ordered the arrest of 91 officials of the Talbot regime. 10 days after the coup, 13 of Talbot's top cabinet ministers, including his brother Frank, were paraded in the nude through the streets of Monrovia. They were tied to posts on a beach overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Before a jeering crowd, they were executed by a firing squad. They were denied lawyers, denied an appeal, denied any semblance of a fair trial. The message was clear. The old ways were dead, and the new regime would be built on fear. Doe established the People's Redemption Council, PRC, a junta of 15 low-ranking officers, suspended the constitution, and declared martial law. For the first few years, Doe was a darling of the West. The Cold War was still raging, and the United States had massive investments in Liberia, most notably the CIA-owned telecommunications giant, the Liberian American-Swedish Minerals Company, LAMCO, and its rubber plantations. Liberia was also home to the Omega Navigational Station, a key piece of U.S. military infrastructure. In return for millions in U.S. aid, Doe played the perfect Cold Warrior. He broke diplomatic relations with the Soviet Union and offered the U.S. military staging rights at Liberia's ports and airports for its rapid deployment force. But at home, the People's Redemption was quickly becoming a nightmare of personal rule, corruption, and ethnic favoritism. Doe didn't trust anyone outside his own crown circle, and he was paranoid with good reason. The plots against him began almost immediately. In 1981, just over a year after the coup, a major rift emerged within the PRC. Doe's fellow coup maker and outspoken critic, Thomas Wei Sien, was arrested along with 4 other officers. They were beaten, denied a lawyer, and within 3 days, they were dead, executed in secret. Doe was no longer primus inter pares, first among equals. He was the sole ruler, and he loved the trappings of power. In 1982, he made a state visit to South Korea. While there, he was awarded an honorary doctorate from a university in Seoul. From that day on, he insisted on being called Dr. Samuel K. Doe, a man who had just finished his high school by correspondence, now a doctor. By 1984, under intense domestic and international pressure to return to civilian rule, Doe oversaw the drafting of a new constitution. He lifted the ban on political parties and scheduled elections for October 1985. It looked like a return to democracy, but Doe had no intention of losing. He set strict rules. He banned 2 opposition parties for allegedly advocating socialism. He created his own party, the National Democratic Party of Liberia, NDPL, and he made sure the playing field was anything but level. When the votes were counted, the official results showed Doe winning 50.9% of the vote, just enough to avoid a runoff. International observers and local monitors cried foul. They reported that ballots were taken to secret locations, counted by Doe's hand-picked staff, and that the true winner was likely Jackson Doe of the Liberian Action Party. The election was a sham. The sham election lit the fuse. On November 12, 1985, just weeks after the vote, Doe's former ally and the popular former commanding general, Thomas Kwiwonkpa, slipped into Liberia from neighboring Sierra Leone with a small band of rebels. Kwiwonkpa, an ethnic Geo, had been a key figure in the 1980 coup, but had fallen out with Doe and fled into exile. In the early hours, they seized the national radio station and announced that Doe had been overthrown. For a few hours, Monrovia erupted in celebration. but it was short-lived. Doe, hiding inside the executive mansion, rallied his loyal Kron forces from the army. By that afternoon, the counterattack came. Kyong Pa was captured, killed, and in a grisly display of power, his body was mutilated and paraded through the streets. The aftermath was genocide light. Doe's forces, hungry for revenge, went after Kwiwonkpa's ethnic group, the Gios, and their allies, the Manos. For weeks, soldiers rampaged through neighborhoods, setting up roadblocks, dragging people from their homes, and executing them on the spot. An estimated 500 to 1,500 people, mostly innocent civilians, were slaughtered in the reprisals. The U.S. State Department's own human rights report from that year documented summary executions, killings, and reprisals against certain ethnic groups, as well as torture, lashings, and arbitrary arrests. The Sessywood ordeal, a traditional trial where suspects are forced to drink a poisonous bark concoction, became a tool of state terror. Doe's regime had become a full-blown ethnocracy, favoring Krons for all top military and government posts. With the Cold War winding down, and Doe's brutality becoming an embarrassment, the United States began to distance itself. Aid dried up. The economy collapsed. Doe was isolated and desperate, and waking in the wings was a ghost from the past, Charles Taylor. Taylor, a former Doe official who had fled to the US after being accused of embezzling nearly $1 million, had returned to the region. On December 24th, 1989, Taylor and his small band of rebels, the National Patriotic Front of Liberia, NPFL, crossed the border from Ivory Coast into Nimba County, the heartland of the Gio and Mano people, who Doe had butchered in 1985. The response was immediate. The oppressed ethnic groups flocked to Taylor's banner. The First Liberian Civil War had begun. Within months, Taylor's forces controlled most of the countryside and were closing in on Monrovia. But the conflict soon splintered. A rival faction, the Independent National Patriotic Front of Liberia, INPFL, led by a mysterious and ruthless figure named Prince Johnson, broke away from Taylor. By the summer of 1990, Monrovia was a city under siege. Doe was cornered in his mansion, but he refused to flee or cede power. September 9th, 1990. This is the day that would seal Samuel Doe's legacy in blood. Against the advice of everyone, Doe agreed to leave the safety of the executive mansion. He was heading to the headquarters of the peacekeeping force, the Economic Community of West African States Monitoring Group, ECOMOG, at the free port of Monrovia. He believed he was going to a peace conference. He arrived at the port with a small entourage of bodyguards, but as he entered the building, something went terribly wrong. The trigger, some say, was a communication breakdown. Doe's bodyguards refused to disarm, as required by the peacekeepers. Gunfire erupted. In the chaos, Doe was seized not by Taylor's main force, but by Prince Johnson's INPFL fighters, who were also present at the base. They captured the president of Liberia. What followed over the next several hours was not a summary execution. It was a slow, sadistic, public torture session. Johnson's men stripped Doe down to his undershorts. They threw him to the ground, kicking and beating him. They brought in a civilian videographer, and the entire gruesome event was recorded. The tape, which later circulated on the black market and online, is one of the most horrific documents of modern African history. In the video, you see Doe on the floor, his face bloodied, crying out in agony and pleading for his life. He begs, "Don't kill me. I beg you, man." He offers money, power, anything. Around him, Prince Johnson's rebel fighters, high on drugs and power, taunt him. They cut off his fingers to get his rings. They drink beer and laugh as they torture him. Prince Johnson, holding a can of Budweiser, interrogates him, coolly watching as his men mutilate the man who was, just hours before, the most powerful person in Liberia. They sliced off his ears. The torture went on for hours. Finally, unable to withstand the pain, Samuel Doe bled to death. His naked, mutilated body was then taken to a mortuary, where it was put on display. His corpse was eventually buried in a pauper's grave, its location lost to time. Samuel Doe was just 39 years old. His death did not bring peace. It plunged Liberia into over a decade of horrific civil war that would claim the lives of an estimated 150,000 to 250,000 people. Prince Johnson, the man who tortured him, later became a senator and a key kingmaker in Liberian politics. Charles Taylor, after winning the 1997 election, was eventually ousted, tried, and convicted of war crimes by an international court in The Hague for his role in fueling the conflict in neighboring Sierra Leone. Samuel Doe rose from a village boy to the pinnacle of power on a wave of justified anger against a corrupt elite. But he became the very thing he destroyed, a brutal dictator who tore his country apart along ethnic lines. His rise was a shock, but his fall, tortured on a dirty floor, crying for mercy, his body destroyed, was a tragedy that serves as a stark warning of what happens when power has no limits and justice is confused with revenge.